Hi, I'm Mr. Mullaney. This is the lesson recap of our lesson about triangular trade. I'm starting this lesson not with Mr. Boyle's slides yesterday, but with one of the images Mr. Boyle showed us, which is the classical version of triangular trade. It involves North America and the Americas sending sugar, tobacco, and cotton to Europe, textiles, rum, and manufactured goods, mercantilism, they're making and selling their own finished goods, to Africa, and then slaves to the Americas. That is the classic version of triangular trade. It's what our textbook talks about. It's what you learned yesterday in class. When I hit the back button, I'm actually going to go back to the triangular trade Wikipedia page. Wikipedia can be a very good source. However, you don't cite it on academic work, but it can have some really good information. And here it shows you how when you look at history, you often see sometimes things are more complex, or two different versions of the same thing, or different spellings. And so here we have the triangular trade when we talk about New England and slavery. And so this is what we read about yesterday after the notes, where New England is the other leg of the other vertex, excuse me, let me be correct mathematically. New England is the other vertex, not Europe. So sugar goes to New England. From this vertex here is more of the Caribbean as opposed to just the Americas. So you have two American vertexes, New England and Caribbean. Slaves go to the Americas or the Caribbean from Africa. Sugar from the Caribbean, farmed and produced by slave labor, goes to New England. And then the rum and goods also go to Africa, or go to Africa from New England, right? So in this, we really talk about slaves coming from West Africa to the Americas. They come to the Caribbean where there are the sugar plantations, but they also make their way not only to the American South where there are tobacco plantations and rice plantations, but also to New England. And that's what we read about after, the Forgotten History Choices program from Brown University. They do some great things, and that was the Forgotten History of Slavery in New England. We read about that after the notes. All right, let's get to the notes that Mr. Boyle designed for us yesterday. Not my Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant wrestling thing. Yes, Hogan and Andre, for you wrestling fans out there, they wrestled at Shea Stadium in 1980. All right, but we're going to go on. We got distracted. That happens. Triangular trade, these are from Mr. Boyle. First leg is England to Africa. Luxury items, Luxury items, firearms, cloth, iron, beer, finished goods, basically going from Europe to Africa. Second leg is the Middle Passage. This is where this is not fun at all. This is really horrific history. This is where we talk about slaves going from West Africa all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. The conditions were so brutal that 40% of the slaves didn't survive. Why were they so brutal? Because they were packed in like such, with no room, with no modern sanitation. Think about all the things we take for granted today. Deodorant, showering, septic removal of all bodily waste. None of that is happening, and you're on the ocean, the open ocean, oftentimes going towards the Caribbean where it's hot. There is no shade on the ocean. So this was absolutely brutal. So this is what Mr. Boyle showed us. The readings showed us a different cross-section where the same ships were used for barrels as were used for slaves, and sometimes they had only barrels or only slaves or a combination thereof, and the slaves are basically treated like the barrels, as many as can fit. I mean, it was awful. All right, third leg is from the Americas to Europe. That's your raw materials, your lumber, your rice, your furs. And so that's what happened, all part of mercantilism. And that there is the conventional view of it that your textbook would talk about. The Middle Passage is really what we want to focus on, and that's your slaves to the Americas. All right, that's known as the Middle Passage, the brutal passage for slaves. Like I said, 40% die. All right, Africans in the colonies, all right, plantation labor in the South needed a lot of slaves. Some of them had over 100. All right, you talk about rice and indigo, and tobacco, all take a lot of labor. Tobacco doesn't take as much, which is what you have in Virginia and Maryland. Then you have the New England and Middle. That's where we end, and then we went into the reading about New England colonies. So not as many slaves. Rhode Island had the most percentage, highest percentage in 1750. It was 10% of the population, we learned from the reading. Connecticut had the biggest overall number. And free African Americans, not many were free until after the Revolution. And if they were, they endured very poor living conditions because of limited rights. What we'll get into later with the Declaration of Independence and then the Bill of Rights really does not apply to minority populations in America at that time. So that's the lesson recap on triangular trade.